Yeah, and Naman, we have a sense of why the TPLF attacked the Northern Command and other stations in that region. We're talking about some of that now. But why did they fire rockets into Eritrea? Do we have a sense of what their purpose of doing that was?
Well, if they say Tzadkan Gabratensah, according to the comical and uh, uh, Alex Duval, Africa's top military strategist, he wrote once, uh, if a person is a top military strategist, they would not plan and undertake such an idiotic strategy, attacking at the same time two forces. They know that the Eritrean military is very strong, highly disciplined, and they have this fear. But I guess again they miscalculated. Also, there is another perspective which we cannot rule out. They wanted to force Eritrea not only in the defense but also in the offense, in self-defense, so that would somehow internationalize the conflict, and Eritrea would get involved, so that others on their side would come on their side to support them. That might be also the calculation. But ultimately, both when they started the war and the cyber rattling, the bragging, and anti-Eritrea rhetoric, always on the media coming out and telling the world to your face kind of statements by the TPLF leadership that they would go to Asmara to topple President Isaias Afwerki. All these, at one, we can say they mean it. They know that they, because of their fear and their complex, inferiority complex, what have you, they have that position where if they threaten Eritrea, somehow they may send a signal for Eritrea to restrain itself. But instead, the continued belligerence, the continued aggression, even physical aggression at the border areas by the TPLF, Eritrea was not left with a choice but to defend itself in the border areas. And I think that's the reason. But also, as I said, they may have calculated that all this would reinforce some of the hostility within some circles of the West towards Eritrea and generate support for the TPLF in this war. I think that's their calculation. Even now, they don't want to say it is primarily NDF. It is Eritrea, because that really plays into the perception, the hostility you see among some or the key leaders within the U.S. Executive branch and some ambassadors and the officials within the U.S. government, also within the EU and within the mainstream media and within the academia. All these are, to play into that and to manipulate that the position. So now you see a lot of hostility towards Eritrea on the statements and views and tweets that we see around from some members of the international community.
Right. You actually just answered the question I had for you, which is you see even now during the latest conflict after the TPLF went on the offensive in August, there's this hyper focus on Eritrea. They actually don't mention Ethiopia as much in terms of the TPLF activists and some of the people like Alex Dewal and those that had really close relationship with the TPLF and essentially act as their spokesperson. There's a hyper focus on Eritrea, and I suspect it is because they know that they're actors in the West, including, Ambassador Tibor Nagy, who openly said he had some sort of a grudge with Eritrea's president Isaias Afwerki. So these are ambassadors that are expressing personal grudge. So it would make some sense that the TPLF activists and the TPLF themselves would hyper focus on Eritrea. Another statement that I've been seeing a lot, I don't want to say a lot, but repeated on social media, is this sense that Ethiopia or Ethiopian officials don't, really mention the contributions that Eritrea has made in this last 2 years of conflict. There's different reasons why that may be the case. We know there's a lot of collaboration behind the scenes in terms of the tripartite alliance and the security of the region. But do you think that's true, or are we missing it, that there are Ethiopian officials or known people in that world that are speaking up for Eritrea's contributions, and if that's not the case, why do you think that is?
Well, there may be many many consideration why we don't hear most senior officials appreciate the role of Eritrea. There may be several considerations. But one thing is for sure, even the Prime Minister, Abiy, has appreciated during his speech in Parliament the role of Eritrea in the first round of TPLF's onslaught, aggression and military offensive on Northern Command. He did explicitly mention the vital role which Eritrea played. Regardless of what some officials may or may not mention, we were the leaders of G7, and also many Ethiopians' goodwill understand that Eritrea played a very important role in bringing about the change, the reform, without the external pressure, and also to a degree with the support of Eritrea. Many aspects of the struggle being waged inside of Ethiopia, including by G7, the moral boost, the media, the information warfare, the informing and really making the Ethiopian people aware of the TPLF's impunity, tyranny, and domination were done via many outlets, including ISAT. The very vibrant psychological strengths that generated within Ethiopians, the resistance it generated in Ethiopia, all these important political and psychological components of the change, and even it gave the courage, it gave some strength and stamina for those within the PDRF to challenge the TPLF. Without the popular struggle in many parts of Ethiopia, popular people's resistance, without the robust campaign and media and external struggle against the TPLF tyranny, those people in the PDRF would not have gotten the strength by themselves to bring about the change. So it's a confluence of factors, including the support Eritrea gave to many Ethiopian groups, including G7, where I was in the leadership, that we saw the change in Ethiopia. So this fact must be appreciated. And the war, the thousands of Eritreans paid in life and limb and blood to ensure, without high probability, that the TPLF would have marched to Addis without the participation of Eritrea. And of course, Ethiopian people rejected, as I said earlier. The hate towards TPLF was absolute. That also is a factor, as I said. There were 4 or 5 factors, key factors. And one is the role of Eritrea in making sure that the TPLF is pinned down in Tigray. And for that, Eritrea played a big role, vital role.
There's a question that's coming in from Sunnight. It's in regards to something that you mentioned at the top of the hour, and I want to give you a chance to answer it. So she says, were there some Tigrayans in the ENDF that refused to be involved? Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, yes. According to Chacho, it's a very must-read book, The Betrayed Northern Command, by a sergeant of ENDF who was in Tigray. On that day of Mbemi, where hundreds of ENDF soldiers were massacred, he undertook a serious research. I mean, I would not say it's conclusive, but he did his best to interview officers, NCOs, non-commissioned officers, and privates, men and women, to understand what happened in many of the bases where TPLF launched an organized, well-planned, orchestrated attack, assault on many bases. So he interviewed those people who were on these bases, who fled, who survived the assault, and he said that there were Tigrayans, however, very minority, who refused to be part of this brutal conspiracy that resulted in the days and massacre of hundreds of ENDF soldiers on the same day in many places. So yes, there were.
And can you say a little bit more about the soldiers who were on the Northern Command that were attacked and had to go to Eritrea, some on foot, some having been stripped of their clothing? What exactly happened there, and what happened while they were in Eritrea that helped them recoup?
Oh no, I mean it's obvious. Even the prime minister was very clear when he reported to Parliament his first appearance there after he launched the law enforcement operation back in 2020 after the November 3rd, 4th attacks. He stated that the Eritrean people and the Eritrean government fed, closed, organized, and gave all the logistics material, including war material, for the army, Ethiopian army, to be organized in orderly fashion as a military to go and be part of the counter-offensive. So of course, other forces like Amhara, Afar Special Forces, FANO, and also ENDF elements and units from other commands, Western, Southern, and Eastern commands were brought for this multi-front counter-offensive against the TPLF in that area. And the Prime Minister stated the role Eritrean people and the Eritrean government played back then.
And Neamin, before we let you go, can you talk a little bit about the change in the way the people have been working together, Ethiopians and Eritreans? You've been working, as an advocate for a very long time. I'm sure you've seen the changes, the evolution of perspectives among Ethiopian and Eritreans. Recognizing maybe to some degree that TPLF was part of the problem, and as a mediator. So can you talk about the evolution of the people's relationship?
Yeah, we can say that we can discuss that in a much elaborate detail, but I would give a few points here which are pertinent. It's very important to understand that during the Derg and during the TPLF, there was an orchestrated heavy propaganda hate that was churned out repeatedly in many platforms and several media outlets, and the perception among many Ethiopians towards Eritrea and the leadership was very negative, including me. Before 2005, when the TPLF stole the election, massacred over 200 Ethiopians in Addis Ababa. It was a turning point for me. Before that, my perception and my feeling towards Eritrea and the leadership was very negative because I grew up under the Derg. I was a little kid when the revolution came, and I happened to be from a military family. And my view towards Eritrea and Eritrean independence and Eritrean liberation and Eritrean leadership was very negative. And I can't say much about my own family, which has ties with Eritrea, not blood ties, but my father spent most of his time in the ports Massawa and Asap as he was the naval officer and then the chief administrator for Ethiopian ports. So there was that sense of first betrayal that where my father toiled to build those ports because he was the chief administrator for 17 years from the very day, few months after the 1974 revolution until the end of 1991. And he's credited with many measures and the positive contributions to the development in Ethiopian ports. So that by itself, and then at the personal level, at the political level also, we grew up under a condition where Eritrean struggle was portrayed as being the proxy for the Arabs and petrodollar, back then it was called, etc. The perception, not only me, of majority of the Ethiopians was very negative towards Eritrea. It is during the struggle that we understood the struggle against the TPLF, especially after 2005, when we established a relationship with Eritreans and we understood them, we studied their struggle, and we came to understanding that Eritrean struggle started not out of vacuum, ex nihilo, but because the successive Ethiopian governments also committed many blunders and many mistakes that pushed the Eritrean people towards struggling for their independence, starting from the Emperor Haile Selassie, abrogation of the federation, dissolution of the federation, that really started it, and then subsequently when the Ethiopian military, which was under the Derg, of course the military fought for Ethiopian unity, but some of the elements within the Derg security committed atrocities in Eritrea, and all that contributed to pushing the Eritrean people for struggle. So that understanding emerged for me and for many Eritreans when we really came to understanding and trust that you start to empathize with how their struggle started instead of what we have been fed. So reading, discussing their literature, EPLF literature back in the days, including when the TPLF told EPLF told the TPLF that ethnic division of Ethiopia and the Tigray Republic agenda, which the TPLF entertained, were wrong. We read those. We discussed with the people. We discussed with their scholars, with their intellectuals, with the political leadership, the military leadership. So that understanding created an empathy why the Eritrean, struggle came about, and also understanding how treacherous the TPLF is in starting the war with Eritrea, and the cost on the lives and the economy and the social fabric, both in Ethiopia and Eritrea. The really lost 2 decades, appropriately named, 2 lost decades for peace, stability, and economic progress between the two people. Ultimately, our people, Eritrean people, Ethiopian people, there are so many ties and bonds, historical, cultural, and although the political, work and the cooperation in many domains needs a lot of work, I think we should understand and come to terms that in this region, not only with Eritrea, but Somalia, the Horn of Africa, we need to work towards peace and stability. We need to work towards regional security architecture. We need to work towards elevating our people in the entire region out of poverty and ensure that we rely on ourselves. And that needs trust and confidence. And that needs a lot of nurturing of what has been achieved by President Isaias and Prime Minister Abiy, rapprochement and the agreement to really come to peace and bring about peace between the two countries, where for 20 years, almost 20 years, there was no war and no peace condition, and it needs a lot of work going forward. And this is vital for Ethiopia, vital for Eritrea, vital for the region. But for all this, the stumbling block, the biggest threat remains to be the TPLF, which is delusional, cannot recognize and accept the reality. As we said again and again, they controlled everything in Ethiopia. In the situation where most of the power was taken out of their hand and they were relegated to regional leadership. They could not accept at the psychological level that condition. And remember, Triyu Mesfin, Abbas Eye, all these big wigs of the TPLF, old guards were attacking the prime minister in the reform process the very first few months of the transition. They were belligerent from the beginning. The war, in fact, started not on November 4, 2020. The war started when they took turns all over the state media, Tigray media, to berate the prime minister, to call him names, to really negatively portray every effort to turn around and to bring about reform, political and economic. They undermined it through their poisonous propaganda. So they really started the war because they could not accept the fact that militarily, security, economic, diplomatic domination and hegemony, which they enjoyed, now has ended. They could not come to terms. All this propaganda, all this veneer, smokescreen about federalism, about unitary, Abiy being Ahalawi, that Tigray sovereign, autonomy, and this so-called nation nationalities, which is really a figment of their imagination. There was no equality of nation nationalities. I mean, we have to be honest. Here you have a group that claims to represent Tigrayan people. As you know, it doesn't represent all of the Tigrayans. But let's assume 6% of the population had the lion's share, near monopoly of everything in Ethiopia. And they talk about nations and nationality. How can you justify 90, 80% of the key functions in the military, in the security, and the lion's share in the economy, 40%, not only effort, but many, several big companies owned by TPLF members or their cronies? How can you justify that you have brought about all the people of Ethiopia, Oromo, Tigray, Amara, and others, have a fair representative share both in the economic, social life of Ethiopia? That didn't exist.
Yeah, I
So
think the TPLF is really just known for its, contradictions, right? They talk about self-determination based on ethnicity, but where was that during their 27 years of rule? If all
nowhere to be found. They committed genocide in Gambella. They committed genocide in Ogaden. They committed all sorts of atrocities. Regional leaders like the Benishangul president, the one-time president of Benishangul, and many other regional leaders. let alone do, even if they did a fraction of what the TPLF did, you know what the TPLF did? Automatically, they would be, go to jail. That's what happened. Let alone all this catastrophe that the TPLF committed, and a minor infraction, a minor, challenge to their hegemony, exacted a heavy price for many regional leaders and many officials who dare to say, who dare to go against what the TPLF wanted.
Yeah, and before we let you go, Neamin, I want to end on a positive note. Per usual, the TPLF takes up space in our life, but which makes sense, based on the amount of atrocities that they've committed. But you said we've lost 20 years. Ethiopia and Eritrea has lost 20 years because of some Western interference, outside interference, TPLF being the proxy. Let's envision 20 years from now, what is possible with peace and stability in the Horn of Africa?
Well, for humanity, for us human beings, both at the personal level, at the political level, it boils down to choice. We need to choose peace and stability, collective security in the sub-region, collectively have an arrangement, an architecture to defend ourselves, have a framework for economic cooperation, have a framework for development, have a framework how to really expand the opportunities for our people who are, for the most part, in poverty in the entire region. So if there is a will by the leadership of the region, each country, we have to make choice to build that common architecture for economic development, peace, stability, and security in the region. And that's possible, given a far-sighted leadership. It may not come within a day or a week or a month, but it needs nurturing, and trust and confidence is very important. Not only the calculus of power, who has, military or economic power in the region, but trust and confidence is very important. We have a lot of challenges, and we must tackle them. Not only the known challenges of poverty, but there are many emerging challenges coming up. The world is becoming more disruptive, more complex. The international order itself is challenged. So there are many, mega challenges that needs regional cooperation, trust and confidence among the leadership, people-to-people relationship being, built and nurtured. All this would help in steering the region towards a more prosperous, a more hopeful, a more stable, a more secure environment and region for all our people. Eritrea, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, Djibouti, and others, and so the two Sudans. So it needs a creative innovation and intervention on the part of the regional leadership. And in this regard, towards that end, intellectuals, media, the civil societies have also a vital role to play towards that direction. And, it's always greed and the calculus of raw power, a real politic, which is really cynical, that pushes, nations and leadership into maximizing their own narrow political gains and political power. But that's short-lived. I think we have to aspire to elevate our people out of poverty, the region at large. We have a lot of potential, a lot of resources, untapped resources. So we can tap them by putting a framework how we can work together, cooperate together for mutual benefit for all our people and our countries in this region.
Certainly a lot of work ahead, but so much great potential, as you mentioned. Neamin, thank you so much for making the time. Thank you for your insight. Really appreciate it.
you should be, you should appreciate me more, because I have refused to appear on many medias, because I
I
have
know.
talked for 20 decades, I mean, 20, over 20 years. So it is time for you and your likes to speak now, but you insisted, so that
I insisted
thank
today,
you.
and I appreciate you making the time today, especially considering it's an odd hour where you are. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Hermela. Keep up the good job. We are
Thank you.
proud.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.